technology, I really enjoy, reaching out to the community, maybe now as an elder statesman than as a youngster back in the day. But more specifically, I'm the applications manager at calling here at the county. So that gives me, my group is GIS. It's also application development and records. So it's kind of an interesting combination, but we're doing our best to automate all of those items and deliver the best service we possibly can. So let me turn over to Wade, our featured speaker.
Hi there. Well, my name is Wade Kloos. I'm the DNR at Utah DNR GIS Director. So I'm going to spend some time talking to you today a little bit about ROI. I think it has been one of the major emphasis that I have had here at this organization. And it's, I guess it's become a little bit of a passion of mine, just to see if I can't kind of turn the tide a little bit of what might be a little bit of resistance in the GIS community to maybe do this on a more frequent basis. So that's about it for my short intro. You'll hear enough from me in a little bit.
Awesome. Rita, can we hear you there?
Can you hear me?
Ah, we can hear you. Yay.
You're going to have to talk up, though.
The good old reboot.
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem. You want to introduce yourself to the community?
I guess so. I'm Rita Taylor. I'm with the County of Gloucester. I've been the GIS coordinator here for 100 years. And today's my first Zoom. Where's my second Zoom, I guess.
Awesome. You're going to be a seasoned user after this.
I hope so. It's kind of fun.
This is great. This is great. Thank you, everyone, again.
And I cleaned my desk.
You did. I can see the change.
Yeah. It's all on the floor.
Anyways, so yeah, thank you, everyone, for participating. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Wade take over and give us our featured presentation about ROI.
Great. Okay. So I will share the screen here. All right. Can everybody kind of see my desktop now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Toby, for inviting me to kind of share my perspective on GIS, ROI, and maybe serving as your guinea pig a little bit here to see if this platform kind of works out for us. Hey, are you going to record this, Toby?
Yeah, it is recording right now.
Okay. So, all right. Well, let's just jump in a little bit and see how this goes. So I thought what we do is kind of start with a definition. Here is perhaps a pretty obvious definition of GIS ROI. We're really talking about the act of measuring and documenting the impact and the business value of GIS solutions. So I wanted to clarify this basic perspective of GIS ROI so we can generally define and frame this subject, because really there could be numerous ways to define GIS ROI. And later in my talk, I'm going to provide you with a much more specific and personal interpretation of this sometimes ambiguous subject. There are, of course, definitions for ROI that include math, but we're not going down that path in this short talk. This talk is really focused on the big picture for doing GIS ROI. It's not a deep dive into how to do GIS ROI. Okay, so perhaps after we address the question of what is GIS ROI, we really need to find answers to the question of why we do this. And usually the why is always more interesting than the what, don't you think? This is when the panelists do exaggerated head bobs. There you go. There you go. All right, we're in sync. All right, so what I want to do today is really share with you 4 driving forces that may inspire you to do more GIS ROI. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so driving force number 1. There is a degree of obscurity that all of us in the GIS field have to deal with. And ultimately, this is our need for capturing management's attention. But in this illustration scene, you can think of this as your typical organization. Many independent factions, processes, and results, as well as unique individuals, motivations, and objectives. So inside of this context, you can begin to appreciate the organization's challenge to harmonize this work effort and produce results that accomplish this common mission for the organization. But where is your GIS inside of this organization? And that's a little harder to find. So not only is it hard to find for maybe even ourselves, but even leadership has difficulty understanding where GIS is in the organization and what role it ultimately plays. I think all of us would agree that the organizational origins of GIS are as unique as the organizations themselves. And if you've worked in a few organizations, you kind of know firsthand how differently GIS can be valued across different divisions. So GIS plays various roles within the organization, and yet it can be hard for management to see, let alone understand, the organizational impact that was attributable to GIS. So perhaps the only thing a little bit more daunting than finding our Waldo and Wilma in this illustration is what happens when GIS folks assemble together. Now, I can't say for certain that this actually happened at Esri UC circa 1996, but it's completely possible. All right, so let me paint a different picture. GIS can really pop up anywhere within an organization. Maybe it's here, maybe it's there, maybe it's in a lot of different places, or perhaps it's even centralized. What I hope you can begin to appreciate is that there's really no common roadmap for the executives of your organizations to find and understand GIS, as well as its organizational role and its contribution. So GIS must really promote itself in ways that the business leaders understand and care about, overcoming any obscurities to engage with management and capture their attention. So really, if the business value of your GIS program is not recognized by numerous organizational leaders, you are suffering from some degree of obscurity. So let's take a closer look at how GIS obscurity may manifest itself within a typical organization. So at the individual level, obscurity has its origins deep within perhaps the excitement of a GIS technician applying their craft. This is what they learned in school, and this is what they are all in doing. Perhaps at the consequence of becoming somewhat disconnected from the rest of the organization. So one level higher in the organization finds the GIS manager and the hectic pace of just keeping up with urgent things, playing the part of the top GIS advisor and keeping the GIS data current. So customers may get served, but there might be little attention paid to the organizational impact of GIS solutions. At the top of this organization, obscurity is created because of a general misunderstanding of GIS, its potential uses, and even the potential impact within business units of the organization. the business value of GIS just may not yet be discovered. So it's easy to neglect the attention that could be drawn to GIS due to the gap between GIS workers and the people that guide the organization. So with this, of course, being beaten enough obscurity, let's go ahead and jump on to the next driving force that influences government GIS operations. And this is dealing with the demand for government services and the fact that it is consistently outpacing the growth of tax revenues, especially in fast-growing communities like it is here in Utah. Within this context, progressive governments are developing a doctrine of continuous process improvement. So believe it or not, governments, in their search for process improvement techniques, are actually looking towards manufacturing industry for ways to radically improve their business operations. So concepts like Lean, Six Sigma, the theory of constraints are being considered, adapted, and implemented within government operations. So in Utah, we've sought to implement the theory of constraints across all departments over the past 5 years. But not all government managers will embrace this change. So how can GIS strategically leverage this process improvement movement? So perhaps a better way to conceptualize this supply and demand relationship is to redefine it in terms of government capabilities. So GIS professionals can position themselves by first recognizing who within their organizations are the early adopters of process improvement and team up with them to close this gap between the service demand and their current capabilities. So these are the government managers that are embracing change, and this is GIS's opportunity to bring your spatial solutions into their changes. So understanding this general government deficiency really sets up our next driving force. So government leaders want and need to look good, and therefore business units are under increasing pressure to identify what in their business operations to change and improve to. I'm sorry, I kind of jumped ahead. But the next step is obviously, once you figure out what to change, you have to define really what it is you want to change to. And then the business units, and potentially with GIS's help, need to sell and ultimately implement that change. So not all organization change is a success. I think we can probably all relate with that. But all successful change requires effective change agents. So GIS professionals can be effective change agents, but there will be some new skills to be learned in order to do that. So what I hope you can begin to appreciate is how potentially impactful it could be for GIS to focus on assisting business process improvement. So to be an effective change agent, GIS professionals will need to adopt, for one, a new vocabulary. And so these words really have nothing to do with GIS and everything to do with organizational effectiveness. Your challenge, though, is to adapt how you deliver GIS solutions that affect these business elements. You also need to perhaps identify a new focus on measurements. So these critical measurements listed here have nothing to do with GIS and everything to do with organizational change. Your challenge is to fold GIS solutions into business process improvements that contribute to these changes. And lastly, you'll need to develop some new questions to ask. These questions and more like this have everything to do with the adoption of a GIS ROI mindset. Your challenge then is to collect answers that focus on results, implement high value GIS solutions, and then communicate the difference that GIS produces to your organization. So exactly how you may choose to embrace the role of an organizational change agent is really up to you. It'll take really a little bit of time and commitment to absorb this concept. But to help you in this process, I would recommend these books on the subject. I believe, though, that if you go down this path and apply a GIS ROI mindset, you'll be pretty well prepared to position your GIS solutions front and center within your organization's process improvement projects. So now let's get to our last driving force. So this last driving force is really more of a feeling, but it can be a very powerful one. So most of the GIS professionals that I've encountered tell me that they are that they work with government and GIS specifically so that they can make a difference. So therefore, it only makes sense that we try to use this intrinsic motivation to prime our discovery of all the wonderful ways that GIS solutions produce meaningful outcomes, and then communicate that impact to our organizations in ways that leadership understands and appreciates. Okay, so quick summary. These four driving forces, I believe, affect the vast majority of governments and therefore the GIS professionals within them. They exert a constant and increasingly urgent pressure that should be pushing GIS managers into the corner that has GIS ROI written all over it. So just to kind of prove that point, there's my corner. There's my GIS corner. There's ROI written all over it. So why do GIS ROI? You do GIS ROI so you can adequately respond to and leverage these four driving forces, and then parlay your results into higher value outcomes that solve high priority organizational needs, like documenting business improvement and the accomplishment of wildly important goals. Now, those are differences worth measuring. So after a few years of developing a process for GIS ROI, these are my specific interpretations of GIS ROI that I promised you that I would provide. By practicing GIS ROI, you can learn so much about your business operations within your organization. And then you can leverage this business insight in many valuable ways, not the least of which is for your own realization of the true impact that you're delivering. So ROI is not just about a number, but you can't measure and document the difference and change GIS makes if you don't do some math that ultimately helps you tell the story of where the business started from and how it has improved. Excuse me a second. So ROI is a pretty essential GIS tool. And so by way of an analogy, you wouldn't enter a spatial analysis problem without your ability to marshal data sources and your aptitude for spatial analytics. Likewise, you shouldn't enter a business environment without the capability to demonstrate business value. the more that management sees your work, and by sharing your ROI results, you create this foundation for communication. And I think that GIS ROI is definitely an act. Sorry about that. I think that you definitely have to act. You have to do something, because in order to overcome obscurity, you really have to do something different. Perhaps something that's really radically different than how you currently do things today. So after we address the what and the why of GIS ROI, it's only natural for us to begin to explore how to do it. But as I said, we really don't have time in this webinar to be able to jump into that. But if you are interested in understanding a little bit about how Utah DNR has approached a process for ROI, you can learn about that in ARC User Magazine in the 2016 edition's 4-part series. So in that series, we'll discuss a little bit about, kind of what GIS does as it's listed here a bit in GIS activities and their corresponding outcomes, and how those outcomes may be valued by the organization. So I think the essential thing that I learned was that GIS outcomes and the value that they deliver can only be revealed through the measurement and documentation of GIS results. Otherwise, you are, again, just dealing with a degree of obscurity. You only have a list of things you do. You don't have much detail on the outcomes that you produce if you don't take the time to quantify them, work with the organization's managers to help understand where they derive value, and ultimately communicate that information back to leadership on a regular basis, because they're fickle and they need constant reminding. So if you do have any questions, you can feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to answer questions on the subject. Thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, nice job, Wade. That I wrote down a lot of information. I know I have your slides, but I wrote down quite a few bits here. You talk about obscurity, and I know from my vantage point here at the city of Riverside, we've had GIS for over 25 years, and we had a pretty state-of-the-art application utilizing ArcInfo. And it was so good that they just didn't look at any other products or any other ways of doing things, and to the point where they didn't even migrate to the newest versions for years. And so now we're stuck in a legacy situation. And instead of something that cost, a couple $100,000 at the time when, you needed to rev up from 8 to 9 and then 9 to 10, we're jumping from, 8 to 10, and now it's from a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million, and how I'm leading this back to obscurity is that, when things just kind of keep humming, your attention just goes elsewhere. And at the city here, they didn't have a GIS manager. They didn't have the CIO at the time really pushing GIS to the forefront. We were a city that contracted their IT services, so there's a more distinct emphasis on revenue for providing services through that IT conglomerate. And so I don't think the city's best interest was in mind. And so, GIS ended up having that obscurity as you're talking about. And so there was actually no lack of ownership in GIS as well. And, through the late 2008, 2007, 8, 9, the economic crash happened. And so there was no budgets to even do anything with GIS during that time as well. So, you know, and now we're at the point where we want to move forward with GIS. Other departments are bringing in new enterprise systems, and the first thing they want to do is integrate with GIS, but obviously with legacy GIS, that's almost near impossible without having some sort of ETL process, you know, and creating a lot of hoops to migrate that data from point A to point B. So, you know, I have definitely seen the result of obscurity here. And the way that we're trying to mitigate that is Leah Deasing, our current CIO, who has a deep interest in GIS, was like, you know what, we have to hire a GIS manager and we have to take ownership of this. We just can't let it fly under the radar. And by doing so, we're able to get other departments involved and try to make it a priority, and then push it up the ladder to the city manager's office to get their recognition that, hey, you know, we're in trouble. So we need to move this application into the new world and start getting new ROI. I mean, we've pretty much exhausted the ROI of our current system because we've had it in place for over 20 years. You know, so we can definitely, you know, put a check mark on that, you know, but now we're in the new age. There's a lot of new demands. You know, we have IoT, we have smart cities, you know, there's open data, there's transparency, there's all these new ventures that are really coming fast and furious. And the citizens, electeds, executives, they're expecting us to respond. And
yeah, what may have been the impetus for creating that legacy solution some years ago may not be necessarily the same things that the current leadership is interested in.
exactly.
So just being relevant, identifying what are the outcomes that your organization is attempting to create, and then determine whether or not your application meets that expectation, or it does in fact require, you know, a fresh relook.
Right. And, you know, you talk about measures, you know, and tracking progress. And one thing that we've done here in the city is we have a performance initiative. It's called Riverside 2.1. And each department has a set of goals and initiatives that they have to attain. And so every quarter we actually have to state and submit, we have accomplished this, which is improving our GIS system. And we have to state what it is that we're actually doing. And that gets moved up the chain. That goes to the city manager's office, and then it goes into a staff report to city council. So there's, you know, accountability now, you know, for our GIS system and all of our other systems and all our other departments as well. But, you know, it helps elevate that importance that you have to do something with your system. You can't just let it ride anymore.
Hey, one thing you may want to consider sharing with us then, Toby, is how you're documenting the improvements that you're making with your GIS. Although I would say I wouldn't be at all surprised if improvements in GIS, whether that means more maps being produced, more apps being served, those are interesting stats to GIS professionals. They mean really nothing to an organizational leader. Mm-hmm. It's really about how they help business do the job that they need to do better.
Right.
But I would be interested to learn a little bit about how you are articulating how you're making improvements. That might be a good document to share with us.
Yeah, actually, I'll have to put that together.
So do you want to jump into questions?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone in the attendance has any questions for Wade or for the group, we definitely would love to hear them. But, you know, as people are doing that, you know, we're also a decentralized GIS. You know, we have GIS under IT, but we also have GIS under public utilities. And so the utilities is a driving force to move forward, because they're looking at smart metering, looking at, you know, new customer information systems, outage systems, and all of that integrates with GIS. And so they're really pushing the envelope to move our legacy GIS into the modern world. And so they definitely have a strategic plan that documents all the different enterprise systems that they're supposed to put in place within the next 5 years. And it's a multi-million-dollar endeavor. So there's benefits to be shown, not just from the city side, but also on a utility side as well.
Hey, Toby, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then you can move over to your screen if you want.
Sure.
You know, I've got a question for one of our panelists, Rita. You've been there for, what, 25 years, you said?
Something like that, yeah.
At 100.
All right, so, yeah, 100, yeah, that's right. So when you're there that long, you know, what is your county doing to stay fresh or take advantage of new technology?
Well, to be honest, we were on a different system, and when we converted to the Esri platform, that's been within just the last few years. We've started meeting with departments to see what their workflow is and if there's a way that we can help with this enterprise system. It's a central, we're using an enterprise geodatabase, so anybody in the organization can connect and put their data right in GIS, and then it'll show up on, you know, our website for the general public, or for some of the internal ArcGIS Online projects. You know, they can update their own data out in the field. And so, like you were saying before, we have some departments that are just ready to roll and others that are just, you know, put the brakes on. But we try to meet with somebody every few months just to determine what their needs are and if we can help.
Awesome. Krista Campbell put a chat out there. It says, many organizations are doing amazing things with GIS, but haven't measured their success. Do you have any advice for them? Composing success from past actions and moving forward?
Well, one of the hard things about measuring success, sorry about that, is that concept of measurements. Because if you want to go back to a major GIS project that was deemed successful, what are the measures you're going to use? Did you save the organization money? Were you able to produce more money if you're not a government sector? Those are important things to understand. You have to understand what your organization values, and in government, it tends to be efficiency, right? You have to overcome this perception that government is just not effective. And so anything that you can do to go back in a project, and you're going to have to ask those important questions. What was the cost of doing business before the project? And what was the cost of doing business after? Because you're really just trying to capture what was the impact. So you have to begin to formulate questions that produce meaningful information that you ultimately want your manager to move up the chain and to have it be compelling. So that's kind of how I would begin to approach it. And then, of course, there is, you know, how do you document that? And, you know, without going into much detail, I would just say, if you take a look at Utah DNR's approach, we wanted to keep it simple. Not something you hire a consultant to come in, you hire them for $25,000, they go in and spend all this time and effort doing interviews to essentially ask the questions that you need to find for yourself so that you can begin to understand how to dig out meaningful business metrics. And then once you have that understanding, you're really growing your understanding of how your organization gets work done. And then as soon as you begin to do that, you can begin to document and tell the story this was the difference GIS made. That, I think, is kind of where you need to start. Hit the low-hanging fruit projects. Nothing wrong with that. But I think that most people perceive ROI projects as requiring some type of major investment. It's like all of a sudden you're going to drop $100K into expanding staff or creating the program for the very first time. And so you have to prove a business case for that investment. Well, that's probably not going to happen. But what you can do is begin to go back and just look at the work you do on a daily basis. You improve a workflow here or there, or you introduce a new application. You solve an organizational problem by integrating GIS into an existing workflow. Those are going to be high return projects because they focus on the business side, not the GIS technical side. You know, building more data, that may have some value, but it doesn't have as much value as if you were to target an organizational goal and said, I'm going to help accomplish that goal with whatever I can create with GIS. Those are the high value projects that you'll start to discern as you get more experience doing GIS ROI. Anybody else have any ideas on what's the best way to get started?
I've got something what Collin County has done. We did kind of advocate meetings. We actually went out almost like a road show because our biggest frustration, or mine personally, being in the business for so long, is the obscurity question. How do you solve that driving force? Is people don't really know what you're capable of doing. So they don't know to ask you to do the challenging work. They just know that you make maps and you might be down in the basement. You know, it's time to get out there and let other folks know what you're capable of doing, because not only, you know, it's not that you're going looking for work, you're looking for meaningful work. And I think by just that conversation, getting out and letting people see you, see your group, see the quality of work that you do, I think that then opens up more ROI, more delight from the customer. I remember early in my career, I answered 2 phone calls, and this is what I loved about my job was, can you do me a favor? And then the other phone call was, thank you for that favor. It wasn't until I got more into IT that I realized there's a lot more phone calls and none of them are really that delightful. But in GIS, you know, what you do is unique. And what you do is you can solve problems that people don't even know they have yet. And how do you get out there and see what the solution could be? I think the best thing to start is just go meet your business and understand what they do.
You know, sometimes it's hard to get those meetings because they don't quite understand or connect the dots of the potential value that you have. Mm-hmm. So one thing you could do is just, especially in the municipal environment, is as a GIS manager, pay attention to the council agenda or the planning commission agenda. Find out what major challenges they are encountering, and by listening to those meetings, you can begin to learn what type of outcomes they would really appreciate. And then you plant the seed that says, hey, I heard you guys talk about this subject. Sounds like you're struggling with these issues. I have some ideas on things that may make a difference. Are you interested in a meeting? So along with going out and fostering these meetings, the other thing you can do is prime the pump and learn what the major issues are for your communities, and then figure out the answers.
If you can hear me, I'd like to chime in a bit.
Yeah, go ahead, Isaac.
Between what Tim and Wade said. I agree with both, and I think that for adoption at the level you're talking about, the Council of the Planning Commission, it really needs to be tangible outputs, something that can be that's easily distilled down to bullet points, like Wade said earlier. Nothing technical at that level is going to be worth their time to read. They need to see it took ABC amount of resources before, it takes ABC amount of resources now. And that's why I've been the most successful, because I've narrowed it down to the major projects that were impactful. I have a brochure. I have a standard brochure that I give departments that are thinking about our services. and we give that brochure to them, and they think, that's the talking point. That's the starter that they can start with and say, oh, I didn't know you did this project. I didn't know you did that project. And it outlines those type of things where people were doing X, Y, Z, and now they're only doing part X. So those things I agree with Tim and Wade are very they're very successful, but at the same time, you have to be very mindful of how much information you give, and the pace of the information. It can't be something that shoots for the sky, because then they won't believe you. That's why I said that you have to have tangible results. Excuse me, tangible results that you have from prior successful projects that had a well-defined start and end, with goals that were set by the customer, not by yourself, so that it is customer driven, when it's the customer's success as well as yours, just not you creating some new GIS widget.
Hey, can you share your brochure with us?
Yeah, it's a trifold, and I keep updating it. It's just,
hey, that's such a great idea, because you're taking the initiative to form the communication channel with your executives. They have to be reminded on a regular basis what difference you're making. So kudos to you, Isaac.
Thank you.
I have something to add as well. Our county administrator came from private industry, and he does something called a 3S. It's a type of savings. And in this document, he presents it to the board each month. And if you had something that saved money, time, efficiencies, you just list it, who it was for, who did it help, was it monetary, or was it just efficiency across the organization? And that's something that goes in our board packet, and our board sees it and our citizens see it. And that is starting to bring more attention to things that departments are doing to save this county money, because that's been a big deal since 2008. I don't think they've raised taxes once, which has been hard on us, but it has forced us to look at the way we do things and try to make improvements. So he's done a good job of providing that information to the public. And so that affects GIS, as long as we remember to fill that out. A brag book, I guess, is kind of what it is.
Yeah. You guys touched on a couple items here, and one of them is executive buy-in, and getting their priorities and seeing where GIS fits in. For example, here at the city, we were issued the non-monetary grant from Bluebird Philanthropies with the What Works City initiative. And, that came down from the mayor and came down from city manager's office. And so, it's all based around open data, performance metrics, policies. And so we created an open data committee. And so we brought people to the table, and we focused on an initiative. And the mayor's initiative at that time was homelessness. So as a group, we had representatives from different departments sitting around a big table, and we kind of broke it down to say, okay, what enterprise systems do we have, and what data sources are in there, and what records do we have that are just focused on homelessness. And as we started having, people from our housing division and also fire department, we start realizing that because we brought people to the table, we're having conversations that just don't normally happen. And we're breaking down those silos. And we're finding out that, in our homeless division, they're saying, hey, you know what, here's our top 10 people that we're always having to interact with out in the field, and always having to do these field surveys, and always having to try to find support for these individuals out there. And the fire department is looking at her like, you know what, send me those 10, because I'll bet you that those top 10 are the same ones that we're always getting called out on to help service, because they're passed out, or, they have some sort of issue, and people call the, fire department to come help them out. And sure enough, those top 10s correlated each other. And if we were able to now focus on those top 10 and give them, you know, the housing or medical or mental support and get them off the streets, that's 10, 20 less calls that the fire department has to go out to. And so there's this ROI that was generated just by having this conversation that just normally would not happen in any other context. And so having this open data initiative and doing these deep dives into what's out there has really generated additional benefits above and beyond just what GIS can provide or just what an individual department can provide. It was the collaboration and the networking amongst each other. You know, we were able to document that, and then, you know, obviously get a couple great kudos out of that whole process.
I think it's important too that you don't look at GIS anymore as an isolated department or group, right? It's integrated among everything, just like IT is in many of our organizations, right? I remember a colleague of mine from the city of Dallas, and this was way back, like 2001, when the tech bubble burst. It was a downturn in the economy, and they looked at GIS as a cost center and go, look, why don't we just get rid of it, right? It costs a lot of money. This is how much the software is. This is how much the staff is. And it wasn't until that manager was able to explain to the leadership that, I go, if you get rid of GIS, you're getting rid of 911 service, right? It's integrated. It's part of what we do. You can't just, you know, you just can't cut it off as a, you can't lance it off. It's now part of what you do. And I think we as managers and even GIS folks in general need to spread that around, to show we're not just here doing whatever you ask us to do. We're part of everyday business. As well as your business too. So I think that's also key, just as a reminder to all that if you do go out and talk to these folks, let them know that this is the service that we're providing. It's not just a task that we do whenever you ask us to do.
Yeah, there's definitely
it's ongoing.
Yeah, as a GIS manager, there is a function of marketing that we have to do, not just to our staff and to our managers and, you know, but to executives and to city council, and then ultimately to the citizens. You know, that, you know, we have a new web app that's out there that's, you know, a property viewer or you know, a festival of lights, you know, application, so that you can, you know, partake in knowing where all the parking is at the next festival. You know, we have to be able to market that as well. You know, so I have my marketing hat whenever I'm walking around the city. You know, I represent GIS.
The one warning I have about marketing is you need to be sure that you have examples of work that can be done by yourself of that marketing, because it will fail, and the next time around that funding comes around, that funding won't be available.
Yeah,
so that's the only warning I have about over marketing.
Yeah, well, it's like you said, it's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
To start that conversation, we do mapping, we do web apps, you know, we do analysis, you know, so it definitely creates that buzz, and it creates that conversation. And at that point, then you start saying, okay, what's your scope? What's your ultimate goal? What are you trying to achieve? And let's reverse engineer your outcome.
I address this question from David that talks a little bit about maybe the hard to define improvements that GIS solutions might provide. You know, I think one of the things to be aware of is to really be conscious of anecdotal comments about the difference GIS is making. Nobody remembers those. And so I think you need to be very prepared to move away from, hey, we really helped out this customer because they said it really did a great job. Nobody cares. Nobody will remember either, if that's where you're basing your value. So, but it is difficult because there are hard to quantify improvements that we can produce, such as a better experience on the web. There are other examples that may just be hard to quantify. So what you really should do is focus on the outcomes that make a difference. So if it winds up being call volumes that can be reduced because you're providing more information on the web, do what you can to quantify the situation, the condition before you did work, or try to get somebody's best guesstimate as to what the condition was prior to your event, and then measure it afterwards. But really focusing on what are the outcomes, not just measurement for taking a measurement, but something that actually makes a difference and is meaningful. You need to go to the stakeholders, your project sponsors, and try to get that information from them to help you define how you can take something that's hard to quantify and begin to put a wrapper around it that says this was the difference we made. So please try to stay away from relying upon anecdotal type of successes, the way in which you may describe the difference that you come up with, because it's just not going to stick. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, very good. You know, it's just like going from hard copy map books for field crews to now a field application, you know, to get the ROI you're going to get out of that from additional information, real-time information. You know, I can now query rather than trying to flip through hard copy maps, you know, so.
Yeah, in cases like that, you wind up thinking, all right, let's just think about the field crew that we probably every agency deals with.
Mm-hmm.
And chances are, let's say we're looking at less numbers of employees than we had before. They still have to do the same amount of work, maybe even more.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly growing things for them to inspect and permit and things like that. So now that you can face an organizational challenge and define it, we have less people doing perhaps more work. That begins to frame the problem that GIS can begin to approach a solution for, such as, well, we think that if we can lower the amount of time on site that an individual spends, we can have more inspections, more permits done in a day. Great, now you've just provided the solution that suggests we can do more with less. It's a bit of a cliche, but really it does define a constant problem that government is facing. You just need to plug a GIS solution in that says we enabled more work to get done by less people in less time. And then you articulate that in a way that a city council member can see, GIS, you filled the gap between what our current capability is and where we needed to be. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll look at increasing your budget next year. But just like Rita talked about, that brag list, unless you can highlight GIS on that list that your city manager gives, that once again, GIS created a solution that provided a cost savings, an efficiency measure. Let everybody know that GIS played a part in that process improvement, and you will probably get the type of attention that you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the golden, the holy grail of what we're all seeking to do, is to get the ear of those people.
Yep.
I got a quick observation, Toby, just on your simple solution, right? That is the normal progression, right? You used to make hard copy maps, now it's digital. I think I think all of us, I'm guilty of it. Maybe all of us but Wade, right? You need to do the work on that. How much money was actually saved? Yeah, of course it's obvious that we want to go online, but show the evidence. Even if it seems like it doesn't really mean much. If you can go back and go, look, it used to take us 18 hours to print these maps and deliver them to everybody. Now we can do it in 18 minutes. And that equates to, this gets into a little bit of the math, like that's staff time, that's, power, all that stuff. It's worth doing that sometimes just to show, hey, this is what we do. Even though we do this now without even thinking about it, just stop every once in a while when you make a big leap like that and just jot down the actual efficiency that took place.
Yeah. So what you're really doing is you're building more internal capacity to do work. And that might be represented as a cost savings, but really it just means you're becoming more effective. So I just wanted to plant that seed in that particular word. You're building internal capacity. That is something that different people will value differently, but it's worth you bragging about.
Yeah. Yeah. David just commented about the hurricane and the amount of inspections that went on. And that's ROI, you know, down the road. That's not even ROI at the completion of rolling out ArcGIS Collector, you know, and having an inspector app, you know. And so, you know, you need to keep tracking that ROI even beyond just having it past rollout, you know, for those type of emergency situations, you know. So thanks for sharing that, David.
Yeah, David, it's a great observation. And so now the question I'd throw back at you is, well, what was the difference that it made? 92,000 addresses is significant. And we as GIS professionals understand what that means. But what was the difference to the public? You know, how was service able to be rendered better, faster, cheaper? You know, those are those little nuggets are going to be the things that stick with your leadership.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'd like to roll back a couple of seconds there too, because it's great to talk about growth of the program as a whole and capacity, but I wanted to add something onto Wade. If I can, Wade, you can stop me if I'm wrong, but you also need to make sure that you account for the type of hours you're working, the type of development doing, all the hours you're spending, because with growth, because it's an elastic thing, right? You can only stretch your own self so far in your staff. So at some point, that ROI needs to be able to match with your hours to show that you're exceeding your ability, and that ability, you're exceeding the department staff's ability, and you'll need to be able to get new staff to fill those gaps in technology that you don't understand, or that you need a specialist to come in. So maybe it's just you and a technician and you need a real analyst. But all this documentation will help you and give you leverage when the time comes.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, you can't determine true ROI if you don't include the cost of the investment, which is a GIS person's time and the resources that it takes to create a solution. That's getting into the math, but you're absolutely right to call that out, because you do have to figure that out. It just winds up being part of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, aside from like you're talking about the math, but, you know, you got, you know, the hardware, the software, is it on premise? Is it SaaS? You know, there is all those associated costs to all these solutions that we're rolling out.
Did you guys see the comment in the chat about the slides?
No.
Someone asked for a copy of the slides and video.
Oh, yeah. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and we'll post this. We have a Slack account, and it's a Muni community. And so what I'll do is I'll email you the invite to join that Slack account, and we'll go ahead and post the link, because actually Wade has it on SlideShare. So we'll just post a link in Slack.
Yeah, the SlideShare was the first version of this presentation that I did to NISJIC, and since then I let's just call it improved it. So these are a little bit different, and I will you know, throw this somewhere within the Slack environment. We'll figure out where we can store and archive this information, and I'll throw a PDF of the PowerPoint up just as soon as I can.
Awesome. Awesome.
That sounds great.
Any other questions?
No, great presentation.
No? Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Wade. Wade, this was fantastic. I mean, you
did a great job.
You blew my expectations of what this webinar was going to do, and plus the panelists. You know, Isaac, Rita, Tim. You guys are great, and this is exactly what we were trying to achieve. Get the discussion out there. Get that round table. Look at how much experience we have that we were able to perform this knowledge transfer not just amongst ourselves, but also to the attendees, you know. And this was, you know, I hate to call this like a beta webinar. This is more of a founders webinar, you know, and really making a change in the way that we're trying to distribute knowledge, GIS leadership and management to the community. And I think this is going to be a great way to connect with the community. And I appreciate